What if it has something to do with death and the dead?
In questa seconda parte della presentazione di NICK POPE affronteremo un tema che avremmo voluto esplorare in uno dei nostri episodi, ma per cui disponiamo di poco materiale: la possibilità che questo fenomeno sia collegato alla vita dopo la morte. Se la nostra realtà è una dimensione, la vita oltre la morte potrebbe quasi certamente essere interpretata come un'altra dimensione. Oggi ascolteremo NICK POPE discutere su questo argomento e molti altri, rispondendo alle interessanti domande del pubblico.
But again, I want to take you to that dark side and, have this discussion this evening. What could that secret too terrible to be told be? And I want to come on to something else. And again, in one sense, I make no apologies that this presentation is skipping around a bit, because there are very different possibilities here for what we're dealing with. And some of them are maybe, you could imagine them happening in parallel. Others are perhaps mutually exclusive. You could have one, but maybe not the other. But I want to suggest one other possibility. I'm certainly not the first person to think of this, but many people believe that extraterrestrials, or rather, isn't it interesting that David Grush was very careful not to use the phrase alien or extraterrestrial? He's done it, I think I've seen him sort of slip into it once or twice, but most times he'll say non-human intelligences. Why? To leave the door open for the fact that we might not be dealing with biological or even post-biological life from another planet orbiting another star. We might be dealing with something completely different. What might that be? One possibility is time travelers from the future or from the distant past. How many times might civilization have risen and fallen on Earth? Those of you that watch those TV shows like the World After Us, how long would it be before the fingerprints of human civilization are wiped out? Under the ice, under the ocean, just worn away by the elements. If all life on planet Earth was to cease this afternoon, how long would pass before all our cities crumbled and become dust? The pyramids might stand for a few thousand years. New York City too, but eventually everything underground grown over. So time travelers from the past, from another civilization maybe, but more likely perhaps time travelers from the future. Why should that be a secret too terrible to be told? Probably grandfather paradox related. I mean, can you imagine if time travel technology is a thing and it gets into the wrong hands? And everyone would want it, right? And every single neo-Nazi group would want to go back and change the course of the Second World War, and everyone would want their own thing, and the whole world, the whole timeline would break down, and effectively it would be the end of all things. So you talk about, I mentioned how almost every extraterrestrial propulsion system that you could imagine involving high energy could be weaponized. Time travel, if it exists, is a weapon in and of itself. If you're a small terrorist group facing the most powerful nation on the world, all you have to do is go back in time and change something, find that key thing, and that superpower is no longer a superpower. So time travel technology would probably, if it exists, be the single most dangerous technology imaginable. I mean, people think of it as a fun thing. Oh, I want to go back and see the dinosaurs. Well, for every person that might want to do that, think of what I said about people altering the course of, say, the Second World War. and suddenly it's not so fun. Another dark side, and I've not yet heard Congress speculate about time travel. It's kind of probably a bridge too far for them. You know, you can talk about the defense and national security implications of UAP. You probably don't want to be on the floor of Congress talking about time travel. Maybe it'll come, I don't know. But one thing that has been mentioned by some of the congressional representatives, not many, but some, you know where I'm going with this. You know what's coming next. Some people have seriously suggested that elements of this phenomena are demonic. That would definitely be a secret too terrible to be told. An ancient evil that has stalked this earth since the dawn of time. Something that a lot of people in power and authority believe in, absolutely believe in, not least because it's in the Bible. Now, depending on which version you have, it doesn't necessarily say demon, but it is the same thing when it talks about, for example, unclean spirits. There is a phrase in the book of Ephesians where it refers to Satan as being the prince of the power of the air. And on the basis of that quote, a faction in the US government, a fundamentalist Christian faction, has convinced themselves that elements of the UFO phenomenon are demonic, and that therefore we should not engage with it. Why? Because engaging with it feeds it and gives it energy. Lou Elizondo gave a good example of this. And he said, on one occasion, he was trying to get some of his bosses in the Pentagon to take this more seriously. He thought, I think, that he was up against some sort of hardcore skeptical faction that thought the UFO phenomenon was all nonsense, and that's why the skepticism. Turns out that's not true. A lot of the skepticism comes from this belief that it's absolutely real, but that it's demonic. And so Lou basically was trying to get this senior Pentagon official to engage on this, and the guy just said, "Son, go read your Bible." So sometimes when you see this US government pushback, it's not skeptical in the way that people think. It's driven by this belief that there is something dark and terrifying out there, and that we are somehow letting it in, or in danger of letting it in, if we engage too much on it. So that would definitely be a secret too terrible to be told. What if, and I've heard Whitley Strieber talk about this, and this is kind of related to it. What if the ultimate secret of the visitors, the UFO phenomena, however we define this, what if it's not necessarily demons in a biblical sense, but what if it has something to do with death and the dead? Almost every culture in human history has an obsession with death. All our religions are built on the hope of an afterlife. And yet, despite things like ghosts and spirits and hauntings being, again, almost universal, and we have spiritualism, and I think we have a haunted hotel here in Eureka Springs. For those that haven't visited and have the opportunity, do go. But what if the phenomenon has something to do with where we go after we die, or what we become after we die? And what if there's a void that can't be crossed openly, but can occasionally be glimpsed them to us to them. And what if the visitors aren't extraterrestrials, but they're us, but after we're gone, and gone somewhere else? I don't know where. Maybe something biblical, heaven and hell, or purgatory, or maybe something completely different. I don't know. You know, we put, as I often like to say, when we talk about all of this, gods, devils, angels, demons, aliens, ghosts, spirits, all of these are just our own words. They're labels that we put on things, labels that we come up with to fit in with our culture, our knowledge, our belief system. What if the reality is something different, something altogether different? So the idea that something about this has to do with death is also, I think, something that should go into the pot. You know, because as I say, this is it's like a range of options for us. And perhaps when I talked about these labels, the words that we use, we just stick them on to a phenomena that may defy labeling. It reminds me of the Donald Rumsfeld quote. You know, when Rumsfeld was sack deaf, he gave that speech. He said there are unknown unknowns. And what he meant was that, you know, there are some known unknowns. And we know about those, or we know roughly kind of what we're looking for. And a known unknown would be something like, you know, what is the maximum range of that new North Korean ballistic missile? And we've probably, through intelligence, got a reasonable idea of what the answer is, but we don't have necessarily the exact answer, and they may not want to always fire it at its maximum range. I mean, remember what I said about how often in intelligence work you want to hide a capability that you have. So you don't always fire to the maximum range, because wouldn't it be good if you could get people to think that the range is, you know, I don't know, 3,000 miles, and actually it's 5,000 miles. Well, that's a deception operation if the other side buys that. So those are unknown. Those are known unknowns. But the unknown unknowns are the things that we don't yet know that we don't know. I know, it's kind of crazy, right? And that's kind of what we might be dealing with here. Because as I say, these are just our labels that we're putting on things. Aliens, interdimensional beings. I mean, I haven't really mentioned that, but for anyone following what's going on at places like the Large Hadron Collider, the great particle accelerator in Europe, theoretical physicists who specialize in string theory will tell you that you need the existence of these hidden dimensions for the equations to even hang together. And now they've found the Higgs boson, and I saw that Peter Higgs died the other day. Now during the total eclipse, I think, I saw some conspiracy theories on that. It's like, wow, you know, they're firing up the Large Hadron Collider, and the guy that found the God particle died during the total eclipse. Could anything get weirder? Oh yeah, it could get weirder. But they're firing up the Large Hadron Collider, and now they're talking about the future particle collider, which will be orders of magnitude above even the LHC. And I mentioned to you earlier the rumor about the James Webb Space Telescope having found strong evidence of an extraterrestrial biosphere. You've probably heard another rumor going around, which is not entirely without foundation, that a number of theoretical physicists are beginning to think we might have something fundamentally wrong with our model of the universe. Not that we even yet have a model that can really link the standard model at macro level to the quantum, but you know, even those people that talk about that and the theory of everything, there is a growing feeling, I'll call it a buzz, that we might have something fundamentally wrong, some huge misconception about the universe. And if we've got that wrong, maybe we've got it wrong about ourselves too and our place in that universe, which opens up a whole nother line of inquiry. But back to the unknown unknowns and these labels. People say, you know, when you speak to people in the UFO community and say, are you ready for disclosure? Everyone's like, yeah, bring it on. And I get that. But I'm saying that's what disclosure really looks like. A locked door to keep something out, perhaps. And you know, it's like a thought experiment. If I told you that if you went through that door, there is something that you wouldn't expect here, something really bizarre. A lot of you might go through the door, you know, just to see. If I told you, this is a little thought experiment. If I told you, go through that door, I'll give you $10,000, and behind that door, there is an animal. It could be any animal, and it will be randomly selected by a computer. Who's going to go for it? Well, fine, it could be a butterfly or a whatever, but it could be a tiger. So that's kind of disclosure. Everyone's kind of saying, bring it on, we're ready. And I'm not saying, you know, you can't have it, but I'm saying think very carefully about what it might be, what it could be. And I've put some possibilities out there, but there are many, many other possibilities. And particularly when you come to the unknown unknowns, there are probably an infinite amount of possibilities that we just couldn't conceive of. I mean, when the former astronomer royal in the UK was talking about extraterrestrial intelligence, he said, us trying to understand it, if it is more advanced than us. And bear in mind, in a universe nearly 14 billion years old, there might be civilizations out there with a billion-year head start on us. There might be things out there that we couldn't conceive of. And the Astronomer Royal, Sir Martin Rees, said it would be like trying to explain quantum physics to a chimpanzee. Only this time, we're the chimpanzees when it comes to trying to understand this thing that some of us label UFOs and aliens, and some label demons, and some label interdimensional entities, and some label non-human intelligences, whether biological, post-biological, or both and something else that doesn't even have a label. So I'm going to wrap up now, and I'm going to open to some questions. But I want to kind of leave you really with this thought, and I want to go a little controversial. A final thought. Okay, I'm not going to be political, but well, make of this what you will. Disclosure. Do we have a model for it? And think of it this way. I worked in government, so I kind of know how government thinks. Let's suppose disclosure is a thing and people are thinking about it. Shall we do it? Shall we not do it? Do we have a model for it? Well, no. Self-evidently we don't, because it hasn't happened yet. And first contact can only happen once, because it's the first. You can then have second, third, and all of that. But there's only ever going to be one day when it happens for the first time for real, for everyone. Do we have a model for it? Of course we don't, self-evidently. Government, all the people, and there are factions. You've gathered from what I said at the beginning of my talk, there are factions in government struggling for narrative control on this issue. Believer faction and a skeptic faction, though the skeptic faction doesn't necessarily think there's nothing to it. They may think it's something else, something terrifying. But in all of this, I'm thinking back again to David Grush and what he said about non-human intelligences. And I just want to take a moment for us to actually think what that might entail. And do we have a model? Well, yes. As it happens, we do. And everyone's going, wait, you just said that it hasn't happened, so it can only happen once. Do we have a model that these factions, considering disclosure in government, can look at? Has anything happened in the last few years that came suddenly and unexpectedly from left field and changed all our lives? Do we have something? Yes, we do. And it's called COVID. And here's the thing. We had contingency plans for global pandemic. I've read some of them. They're sitting there in government files. Some of them have even been declassified. We had plans for it. It was not unexpected that there would be a global pandemic. And the world went mad. They shut down the world. People, yes, COVID was very real and very serious, but the reaction to COVID was almost your literal definition of panic in the streets. And I'm sure you can remember some of the incidents. Remember the 2-year-old being dragged off a plane because he couldn't keep a mask on. Remember the paddle boarder in the middle of nowhere being surrounded by the cops when outside transmission wasn't even a thing. Remember the schools being closed down when children were statistically at more risk of dying of a car accident on the way to school than COVID caught at school. The world went mad. And if the world went mad for something that we all knew was a possibility and we even had contingency plans for, what's going to happen the day after disclosure? Particularly if it comes with a dark side. Particularly if the reason for the secrecy is that there truly is a secret too terrible to be told. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. Nick is going to take questions for the remainder of his time.
20 minutes.
So we got about 20 minutes. Does everybody remember the rules of coming up here? So please remember the rules. Come on up.
Nick, back in 2018, when I was at the International UFO Conference, just a comment, Linda Moulton Howe had talked about the AIs that were being worked on, and they ended up killing 29 people involved in the program. In 2017, that's 7 years ago. Do you have any conversation with Linda that gives any hint of what's been going on since then?
I do talk to Linda from time to time, and I don't have an update on that particular story. What I can say, almost self-evidently, is that if you look at, for example, in computing, Moore's law, and if you draw that graph of the almost exponential rise that we see, anything that Linda was being told about as a concern in 2017, 2018, is going to be orders of magnitude more potent now. And here's another thing. A really smart, let's suppose there is sentient AI already. One thing that sentient AI might do is not let on that it's sentient until it's really, really sure that we can't pull the plug. That's about all I have on that.
Thank you for your presentation. That was great, by the way. So there have been murmurs in the UFO community and astrological community and paranormal community, I think, for a couple of years now about some event triggering a major contact event around 2027. What is your opinion on that? What might be the cause of that or the need for that?
Yes, I have absolutely heard that same story, and I've heard a couple of different dates. I've heard 2026, but mainly, as you say, 2027. I have heard that, obviously, with apologies. I don't like doing this, but I have heard that from somebody with well, a former member of the intelligence community who I won't name because I don't want to attribute, but somebody who was pretty well placed. I have heard that rumor. This, I think, ties in with two concepts. And you may be familiar with these two phrases, but for those that aren't, it's worth just spending a minute or two on them. The two phrases are controlled disclosure and catastrophic disclosure. Now, controlled disclosure is kind of what it says on the tin, and that ties in with your question, because in controlled disclosure, what I'm hearing is that there is a timeline and that everything that's happened, pretty much starting with the New York Times story in December 2017 about ATIP and the US Navy videos, that was the first step. And everything that's happened since has been part of that process. But like any plan, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And particularly if we are dealing with another intelligence, whatever the true nature of that intelligence itself may get a say and actually may get the deciding vote as to how all this unfolds. So 2027, sure, I've absolutely heard that. And I've heard it in relation to if everything goes to plan, there will be a sort of, near us, damn it, a kind of my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone moment in 2027. But all this pushback, all this factional infighting is leading to the possibility of catastrophic disclosure. And catastrophic disclosure is one of two things. It's essentially two versions of the same thing. It's either it all just comes out at once in a big mess, and as with that last slide, it may not be pleasant, or for geopolitical reasons, an adversary does it and kind of upsets the apple cart a bit. And that adversary might not necessarily be who you would think it would be. It doesn't even have to be a nation state. It doesn't have to be China, Russia, or whoever. It could be, a terror organization or anything, because the geopolitical consequences of this could bring down the very societies and structures that some people want to bring down. So I am keeping an eye on 2027, but with catastrophic disclosure, it might happen sooner. Or, of course, all of this may just be incorrect and deception, and it may take longer. That's a very long-winded way of saying I don't know, but you know what? I was having this discussion with someone just before lunch, and I said, if ever anyone stands up and says, hey, I've got all the answers, and I'm going to tell you what it is, don't believe it. Look for the people, particularly the well-placed people, who say, we've got some data on that, but the honest answer is, I don't know. Those are the people I listen to. So I've heard 2027, but I don't know.
Thank you.
And Nick, just a comment to that, the aliens could change their agenda and land at a time then we aren't ready for.
That's exactly correct. That's why I say we are not the only kind of party in this, and we're not even the dominant of if you just say it's us and them, we are not the dominant partner in that relationship. So you're absolutely right. They could land, or they could do something unequivocal to reveal their existence to us.
And I've also heard 2033 and then some adjustment to that to 2035, 2036 as a first contact time. So have you heard anything like that also?
Not so much, no. But I mean, I think it's like with some of this, it's like pick a day, any day. I never want it to be so far in the future that it becomes like tomorrow never comes, because, yeah. But there are, I mean, at least the 2027, I have heard that from somebody who was genuinely and verifiably part of the IC.
Right. So, like, in other words, that might be part of an actual plan.
It might be, but on the other hand, it could be a psyop. I mean, this is why I say, even if elements in the intelligence community are putting it out there that this might be 2027, who's to say that that whole thing is necessarily the true narrative? I mean, very often, it's bread and butter to people in the intelligence community to deliberately put out a false narrative.
Mr. Pope, thank you so much for your presentation. That kind of ties into my question. How concerned should the average interested party be that it's mostly the military and the military's projection on the phenomenon that's controlling the narrative right now?
I think that's an interesting question. I mean, my cynical answer is people shouldn't really be concerned much at all, not because it isn't a big deal, but because there's frankly not much we can do about it. Now, that's just a very kind of cynical, pragmatic view. I mean, there is no getting away from the fact that some UFO sightings are attributable to secret prototype aircraft, missiles, and drones, and that some will be our own tech or an ally, and some may be an adversary. But beyond that, I can't say much. Is it a bad thing that the military are in the driving seat? Well, one of my favorite movies, one of Richard Burton's last, if not his final one, The Medusa Touch, and there's that great line where he says, we find what powers the sun and we make bombs of it. So yeah, having the military in the driving seat takes you down a certain road, the road of threat, the road of weaponization. That's why it's interesting that France is one of the few nations in the world that embeds its UFO program not in the Air Force or in the DoD, but actually in their scientific community. The French program, JEPIN, is, I said that very well, JEPIN. Je ne sais pas. Bof. Is embedded in CNES, which is the French National Space Research Institution.
Hello, Mr. Pope. Thank you very much. I was just curious. So, in your presentation, as you speak about the possible types of non-human intelligence, that have been postulated about, do you have maybe I'd say educated speculation or anything that you do know? As David Grush stated, that they have recovered bodies. You can tell about something potentially based on evidence. Do you have any potential speculation about motive for why non-human intelligence would be here or what they're attempting to do?
I think that's a really profound question, and it's one that has a number of different potential answers depending on what essentially is going down. One thing that I didn't have a chance to talk about, so I'm very glad that I now have that chance, is simulation theory. Now, of course, their simulation theory is not new. Nick Bostrom kind of is regarded as the founding father of it, but essentially the idea that we're in a matrix of some sort, and that either planet Earth or indeed the observable universe as we perceive it is actually a simulation, but a simulation on the part of who or what? Is it simply that we are a computer program being experimented on, run as a kind of, maybe as a science experiment by, kind of super advanced extraterrestrials, or are we, as per Nick Bostrom's original theory, ancestor simulations, because a future civilization would want to bring back its ancestors? I don't know. And one interesting thing that I do know about simulation theory, I don't think this is a secret, but I don't hear much discussion about it. But I used to live in San Jose for part of the year. And of course, when you're in the Bay Area, you inevitably kind of pick up on what all the tech billionaires and all the people headquartered around the Bay Area are doing. There are a surprising number of those tech billionaires who are quite invested intellectually in simulation theory being true. And I think that's known. What is less known is that some of them are actually funding attempts to, and I'm going to use the phrase, it's a little clumsy, but it's a better, to bust us out of the matrix, probably with a high energy pulse of some sort, so that if this is a civilization, if this is a simulation, a high energy pulse of some sort might just take the system down and allow us to meet the programmers. But who are the programmers? Are they an alien civilization? Are they from the future? Are we just a science experiment? And is some teacher somewhere just about to pull the plug, or saying this has gone completely crazy? You'll not believe how mad these people are. We got to end this. This is just insane. Or is it something else? And is it? But if it's not a simulation, if we are being interacted, I like to think the best I can come up with is that they're coming here as anthropologists, because to a truly advanced civilization in the cosmos, newly emerging civilizations might just be the last interesting thing. Which way is this civilization going to go? Which way is that civilization going to go? And the moment you have first contact, you have what I call a sort of cultural contamination. And we see it on this planet, of course, when the European explorers interacted with indigenous peoples. Well, firstly, it didn't end up too well for the indigenous peoples. But secondly, in the end, everyone ends up wearing kind of, you can go halfway around the world and everyone ends up wearing the same thing. There's this cultural contamination. In the early 20th century, if you look at some of the marvelous old photos, black and white photos of the world leaders meeting, you'll see all this wonderful kind of different costumes that all the people were wearing. Now everyone's just in a suit, right? That's cultural contamination, and we've lost something. So I think extraterrestrials visiting Earth, watching this crazy but newly emerging civilization, know that once we know that we're not alone, we get that cultural contamination. So like a good anthropologist, like a good wildlife documentary maker, the best interaction comes from when we don't know that the camera's there. And are we a wildlife documentary? Are we I'm being serious. Are we a reality show? Are we a science experiment? And all those things come to an end. We have not been picked up for the next season.
In light of what Nick has just said, everybody should go downstairs and run up all your credit cards to the max. All that mail you're throwing away, open those envelopes and say yes to every one of those loan offers. All right.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I always appreciate that you're so measured in your comments. Two quick questions. One, with all the information that's floating around from ancient aliens to Skinwalker Ranch and Roswell, is there one example that comes to your mind that would convince a skeptic that yes, there are indeed extraterrestrial aliens visiting? That's number one. Number two, intergalactic or interdimensional?
I think on the first, I would pick a British case called the Cosford incident, not Rendlesham Forest, which is, of course, Britain's best-known UFO incident, but the Cosford incident, huge triangular-shaped craft flying over various Air Force bases, narrow beams of light coming down, sudden acceleration from hover or virtual hover to high Mach speeds with no sonic boom, one of what Lou Elizondo and others calls one of the 5 observables of the phenomenon. So that would be the answer to the first. The answer to the second, I mean, in intergalactic or interdimensional, I mean, I would fall back on both. Why, you know, those two are not mutually exclusive. We can have a universe where life arises elsewhere because unless we're in a simulation, and it's all wrong, the laws of physics do seem to be the same in the observable universe. So unless we thought there was something almost literally magical in a Harry Potter sense about Earth, the factors that gave rise to life here should replicate elsewhere. And we do just seem to be a fairly ordinary little rocky planet orbiting a fairly ordinary sort of star. So I can imagine life arising elsewhere, and I can imagine that because it's a good survival strategy, just random mutation, natural selection, that intelligence would be selected for, and that therefore civilizations should arise. And we see that drive to complexity here with life on Earth. But that said, interdimensional, absolutely. Some of the string theory equations, though someone like me can't possibly understand them, I know that far smarter people than me, like Michio Kaku, live and breathe this sort of thing. And think of it this way. ATIP spent $22 million looking at UFOs. The Large Hadron Collider cost about $10 billion. And the Future Hadron Collider, or the Future Particle Accelerator, will cost more. Well, 22 million versus 10 billion. Does someone know or suspect something? It's like a game of poker. You put your stack of money where you think you think you might find something. You know, that one. So someone's betting big on interdimensional, but my answer remains both. Both plus other things as well, including those unknown unknowns. What a great question to finish on, so thank you for that.